Today is February 20th, 2022, and this is episode 263 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I am just amazing. How are you?
I'm so good it hurts.
Good. Good to hear. Hope everybody's had a great couple weeks. Last week was a little crazy. I had family in town, and
that whole Super Bowl thing.
Well, you know, I did watch some commercials. I didn't actually watch the Super Bowl, but there were some pretty good commercials.
I've learned that if I'm not into crypto or the metaverse, I'm just not relevant to advertisers any longer.
This is very true. I completely agree with that. And there's a lot of focus on EVs too, electric vehicles. That was the other hotness.
Which completely off topic. There's apparently a car carrier in the Atlantic on fire, full of EVs.
That's not good.
Yeah,
that's really not good.
Yeah, the batteries are gonna get wee bit combustible. Anyway,
on that happy thought.
Yeah.
Just a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. All right, so let's get into some stories. And the first one comes from govinfosecurity.com, and the title here is Data Breach Exposes Booking Details of 19 Million Customers. So the victim here, or I guess depending on how you think about it, the victim or the perpetrator is FlexBooker.com, who is a company that other organizations can subscribe to manage their calendar. So basically allow their end customers to schedule appointments like, COVID testing, apparently pet euthanasia, and all manner of other things. And interestingly, this is the second time in a month, apparently, or maybe just over a month, that this organization had a problem. Back in December of 2021, they apparently had a breach of just under 4 million records, 3.7 million, that happened simultaneous with a DDoS attack. There's really, despite my best attempt to find it, I couldn't quite figure out the method of breach using the DDoS, but
Yeah, I was also trying to figure that out. It's just written out that they DDoS so that they could exfiltrate this data somehow, and I'm like, how are these two things related exactly? And it's never quite clear.
Yeah, so don't try to figure that out too much, because I certainly wasn't able to make the equivalence. But apparently, it allegedly had to do with an open S3 bucket, as this new issue did. So in this new issue, a company called VPN Mentor, who is a online VPN referral website. Interesting to see these days who all has security research teams. I have to say that. They were trawling the internet and found an open S3 bucket with 19 million records, and that this one also turned out to be owned by FlexBooker. And it quite interestingly, it's kind of implied if you read the article and then you also go read VPN Mentor, that things didn't actually start to get fixed until VPN Mentor's research team went and talked to AWS directly, because they were not getting a response out of FlexBooker. And it seems like maybe the company was thinking that this VPN Mentor team was trying to report or trying to tell them about a breach that they thought had already happened.
Yeah, it seemed like they initially replied with their canned response on the first breach, not realizing it was a new second breach.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So, really highlights a couple of things. One is, you need to not assume that you understand exactly what people are trying to report to you, because I think this contributed a bit to the black eye. And for goodness sake, we really need people to understand how to secure S3. Look, at this point in the evolution of cloud, we have VPN referral websites that are actively looking for misconfigured S3 buckets. That's kind of the place that we've gotten to in the IT world. So it's hard. It's getting really hard to justify.
Do you think this is as a result of we've basically democratized and commoditized the idea of IT? And so we've got a lot of less than experienced people out there now spinning up IT infrastructure just because they have a credit card and an account? I
certainly think that's part of it. And actually, it dovetails super well into the next story, which we'll just jump into because I think it's certainly material. And this is from helpnetsecurity.com, and the title is "Cloud Security Training is Pivotal as Demand for Cloud Services Explode." And one of the points raised throughout this article is what was useful knowledge in IT security in traditional IT environments is still largely relevant, but there's another dimension of knowledge that security people now need to also understand. And so it's not enough to have that, the prior body of knowledge on how to operate securely. We also need people to understand not just the general concepts of security in cloud, but also the specific implementation details of the cloud that you're using. And I think in particular, one of the reasons we keep seeing these issues with S3 bucket access is it's kind of nuanced. I've played with S3 over the years, and it's not hard to make mistakes. Like you have to know what you're doing, I guess is the way I'll say it.
Yeah. One thing that they mention here, I think it's in this article, it's one of the articles we talk about, is there's a lot of good information out there now and benchmarks and best practices that you can apply against these things. And there's a lot of tools out there too. So, I think it behooves you to use something like they talk about the CIS benchmarks for cloud security as, a good baseline to look at. And that makes a lot of sense. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to grab something like that and run through it and figure it out, and what makes sense to you and what doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. I really liked the point that the article does make, that not only do we have to have people who are fluent in cloud native cloud concepts as it pertains to security, but you also really need to provide training to your security team and probably even IT team in the specific cloud provider that you're using, because there's a lot of nuance that may differ between cloud providers in terms of like shared responsibility model.
Yeah. Certainly it's a new skill set. It's a different skill set, but boy, it seems like now we've had enough time to bake on this. We know the common problems. How we've been talking about unsecured S3 buckets causing breaches for years and years and years and years now.
Yeah. Almost since back to the beginning of the show.
Yeah,
there's an entire industry around just constantly trolling AWS and other cloud providers for unsecured storage buckets.
Well, I wonder. It could be controversial to say, but I wonder if perhaps AWS and GCP and others need to go to a default secured approach as opposed to default open. That's certainly going to have a lot of impact and a lot of implications.
So
I don't know.
I can tell you, and I can speak somewhat authoritatively on this topic. There's a lot of hesitation. From the perspective of a cloud provider, you have to walk the line, right? Because if you create too much friction for new customers who are trying to come in, and like it is so hard to get your, Hello World app running that you want to bail and go to some other cloud provider, versus, making things secure by default to the point where we're not going to be having this particular discussion. I don't know that as a industry, the cloud providers have got that nailed. My intuition is that for the most part, cloud providers, AWS included, are really tending more towards the lower friction for new customers. And they actually talk about this in the article about how by default, most of the administrator accounts that come provisioned in your account are over permissioned.
Well, this is the old debate, right? This is absolutely the debate. I mean, you could boil this back down to just passwords. And, why are people's passwords accounts still being compromised with passwords? Why is your banking account somebody guessing your password? It's not that we don't know how to secure those accounts with multi-factor or whatever, but forcing that on users causes a friction point, like you mentioned, that causes loss of business.
Right.
And that's fundamental. Even our own enterprises, we've got to keep in mind, if our security is too onerous, our users will go around it or they won't follow it.
Correct.
That is the old debate that we have over and over and over again about usability, convenience, friction, security. So it's not that surprising to hear. Again, there comes a responsibility that you have to take on when you start building out things online, or these things will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. From by the way, from the cloud provider's perspective, it's like they give you all of the tools that you need, and most of them even provide, training and books and all the materials that you would need to understand how to properly secure your environments. But, they do point out that for example, there's a little bit of a discussion about the Capital One breach and about how, there's a particular protocol that AWS, it doesn't require authentication, and they have a alternative that does support authentication, but they don't recommend you turn off the one that requires that authentication off. So it's a right now, I think the cloud providers are getting a lot of traction and being able to say, like, caveat emptor, this is, right. We tell the customers what they need to do. If they don't do it, that's on them. But there is a threshold, I think, and I suspect that we're like in the period of the inflection point where it becomes a drag on the providers too, right? Just by virtue of people starting to question whether AWS is doing enough or not.
Yeah, they don't want to be perceived as insecure.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you have customer accounts being taken over en masse, maybe it's not necessarily damaging your business directly, but it might be tying up a whole lot of your customer support staff.
Right. Just
simply trying to, help customers through their problems. So anyway, I think this is, you're going to over time have to self-level where, as an industry, the providers are going to have to, do have a higher baseline default set of a level of security, just as a survival means.
I mean, do you think that there's a middle ground here where they could do like a free audit with recommendations on a regular basis to be like, hey, you've got this open S3 bucket. Are you sure you want that?
I think it's a good idea. Obviously in the cloud, all things are driven by scale. And so it would have to be something highly automated and not necessarily tailored. But yeah, right. I think it's not a bad idea.
I don't know. Obviously I'm not in that business, but it's easy for me to say that for free.
Yeah. No, well, I think, candidly, I think most of the providers actually do give you some ability to do that with the various, I forget what, the name of the tools that AWS and Azure and the others provide, but a lot of them actually already do provide
they have
tools.
the capability. It's just usually at a cost.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course it's a cloud. Like,
right. No, I get it. I have nothing against it. I'm thinking from a PR standpoint. Like, if it gets really bad, that could be an option they could take of like proactively alerting their customers so they can be easily stand behind the perception that they're not at fault.
Yeah. The other thing that makes me, now that you say that, I have a feeling that cloud providers are going to want to get ahead of that because, if they don't, regulators, I mean, there's just a ton of what I'll loosely call regulatory innovation going on in the cybersecurity world right now. And I have a strong feeling that most cloud providers are not, super eager to have, government bureaucrats coming in and prescribing what they should be doing for free for customers. And so,
right.
There's probably some impetus for cloud providers to do more anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, moving on to the next story. This one comes from bankinfosecurity.com, and the title is Massive Breach Hits 500 E-commerce Sites. These sound like relatively small e-commerce stores, so I'm not sure the massive moniker was appropriate, but there it is. This attack affected Magento, not just any Magento, a 12-year-old version of Magento that apparently is still in popular use despite having like a decade's worth of vulnerabilities.
If your app is almost old enough to drink in Europe, you've got a problem.
That's true. That's true. It's they're about to enter high school here in the US.
What's amazing is that it's 12 years old, but it only stopped being supported in the middle of 2020.
Yes.
So 10 years of support by Adobe is pretty healthy.
That's not too shabby for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
But anyway, there's a apparently fairly well-known attack that from reading the article here is typically abused in such a way as to add administrator accounts to these Magento shops. But in this particular case, they actually used it to modify the footer code for these e-commerce shops to include a JavaScript file that was hosted on another compromised website, called naturalfreshmall.com. Sounds totally legit, and that loaded in the the credit card scraper. So,
which I mean is
stuff.
It's pretty impressive. I have trouble changing the footer on my Word documents to update the year.
Yeah, they are clever bastards. I will grant you that.
This is like next level footer enhancement.
Yeah, I mean I do have a hard time with CSS still, and they've managed to tailor it to steal credit cards. So yeah, good lesson on keeping your e-commerce software up to date. When I first read this, I actually thought it was as a result of a common hosting provider, and we've seen this in the past where you have hundreds of different storefronts hosted by the same provider, and that hosting company gets compromised, and all of the tenants, so to speak, on that service end up being compromised, and you see creative security firms talk about like how they uncovered this massive breach that affected thousands of stores, but it was really just one server. But this actually does appear to be 500 distinct unrelated sites. So pretty broad attack.
Well, I mean, once you find a very effective attack technique, if you can scan for that vulnerability and mass attack it with a script,
yes,
can be pretty powerful.
Yes, absolutely.
So, I mean, the attack itself is pretty interesting. It's worth reading the the post to get into the details of the attack about how they, kind of injected some code, then got the code to create some stuff and force the code to run when people viewed the page. And it's pretty clever, I thought.
Yeah, it was the particular vulnerability doesn't allow the adversary to run the code directly, but it did allow them to stuff some things into a database that the adversary knows gets deserialized when somebody goes and visits the new logon page. So they were actually, pretty clever in using some kind of a multi-stage attack that relied on some of the normal behavior of the site, and that's what ultimately allowed them to incorporate the malicious code. So interesting stuff. Really, it does highlight the importance of. Let me take a step back. I will bet lunch that all these 500 sites didn't have somebody responsible, or if they did, that person had left, responsible for maintaining Magento.
Look, if it works, don't touch it.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's exactly. Somebody probably, they set it up a long time ago. Their IT person left, and they've been afraid to touch it. I don't have any reason, I have no insight into this other than to say I can see how that would likely happen, and I'm going to bet that's exactly what happened. It just worked. Don't touch it.
I did like that one of the researchers found one of the hosts had 19 different backdoors on the system. Yes. 19. Not 18, not 20. Right? How do you, I don't know. How do you decide 19 is the appropriate amount is what I want to know. In
this case, the researchers found that the attacker had left no less than 19 backdoors on the system. I will say, without discussing details, in the past, in my distant past, I had uncovered many systems that were compromised by multiple different adversaries. And in fact, if you leave an unsecured system on the internet for any material, any period of time, you can actually watch like a King of the Hill play out, right? Where you'll see multiple people or multiple adversaries coming in, compromising it, trying to kick out the other adversaries, and sometimes, by the way, actually applying patches,
right,
to keep. So it's
they're not hackers; they're undocumented admins.
In some instances, it was a little comical, if it weren't sad.
That Log4j thing got patched. Good news. Bad news. It was by a criminal gang out of Europe to keep other bad guys out. But hey, it's patched.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's kind of like encrypting your backups, right? It's important to do, but maybe you want to be the one to do it, not the ransomware.
Look, it's encryption as a service, just unrequested.
Right. Okay, the next story comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is Linux Malware on the Rise. So no surprise for anybody who's been involved in security for any significant period of time. Windows is and has been the primary focus for malware over the years. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's typically the end user platform of choice. It is often federated into an Active Directory, which is, still remains my favorite thing in the whole world. And, it enables attacks that are maybe more difficult on other platforms, or just other platforms don't have the prevalence to make them worthwhile. But the article here points out that, the cloud is starting to change that. Most cloud workloads these days, in some way, shape, or form, run on Linux. And so the point of this article is, based on research done by different research teams, including VMware, which I presume means Carbon Black, because that's, I think Carbon Black is still under the VMware banner, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. Last I heard.
That there is a significant uptick in malware that is intended to target Linux, including, by the way, a version of Cobalt Strike, which has been tailored or ported from Windows over to Linux. And they talk about how in some instances there was some threat actors have actually reverse engineered the Cobalt Strike protocol so that they can leverage it to remotely administer, I guess, a fleet of compromised Linux systems. So pretty interesting stuff. From personal experience, I have certainly encountered more than my fair share of compromised Linux systems, but I will say it's not been incredibly common to actually see malware proper. I mean, what I usually see is, backdoors or web shells or, backdoors as it pertains to like unauthorized accounts and that sort of thing. I haven't actually seen a ton of malware, but I've long thought that's probably not going to stay the case for very long, particularly as Linux becomes more and more prevalent in the IT world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a good wake-up call that some folks may not realize how much Linux, especially cloud-based Linux images, are starting to get on the radar of these bad guys. This is pure conjecture that'll probably get me laughed out of here, but I also wonder if this could eventually port over towards attacking Macs, which are based on Linux. Now, very different infrastructure, very different operating system, very different controls around it, but I still feel like there's this false sense of security with Mac folks who think that they're fairly attack free. But I think if we see more research and development, as it were, being spent on attacking various Linux hosts, who knows what might surface over on the Mac side.
Yeah, I definitely, I'll call Mac Unix like. I mean, it's close enough.
Yeah.
And by the way, even with Windows, we're seeing Microsoft, heavily embrace Linux with its, WSL, Windows Services for Linux, and whatnot. Which, by the way, kind of creates potentially new horizons for multi-platform malware. I've actually been one of the personal frustrations I've had in the Linux world is security agents running on Linux is a giant pain in the ass. And the reason is because a lot of times you're put into this position of, well, do I patch the kernel or do I keep my security agent running?
Right.
and there's always this often this contention between the two. And the good news is that there is a solution on the horizon in the form of the eBPF, the enhanced Berkeley packet filter, I think is what it's called, and it provides a kind of a kernel independent way instead of having to load a kernel module, which is what causes these compatibility issues. It gives a bit of an independent way for security tools like antivirus, EDR agents, and DLP, and other things, visibility type agents to snap into a system without needing to load kernel modules, and therefore you shouldn't see some of the stability and kernel version dependency that we currently see. But it also occurs to me that now Microsoft, by the way, is starting to embrace the same eBPF, and I would assume at some point, Apple may also follow suit. That is, in my view, I was trying to think about things of like how can these be abused. Probably creates an opportunity for very effective cross-platform, low-level malware, which is a little scary.
Well, interestingly, we're talking about agents running on some of these cloud assets, for lack of a better term. I have seen some recent press from GCP, and I think AWS does some similar stuff, of agentless detections of malware based on behavior of a host.
Yes.
CPU spiking, memory utilization, things that indicate through other instrumentation and analytics likely behavior of things like crypto mining and ransomware, that sort of thing, which, it's clever and it's, it avoids some of those agent issues, but certainly it's limited in its scope.
Yeah, absolutely. And, by the way, when a host is compromised in a cloud with CryptoMiner, it is typically pretty obvious to the cloud provider when that happens. And so it's good to see that that providers are starting to do that, because in some instances, the tenants can get hit with a pretty big bill for services that they weren't expecting. And by the way, and I've said this for a while now, like crypto mining in a compromised cloud account is like the best thing you could ever hope for as a victim, because like it's somewhat benign and it's easy to recognize that it's happening. And many other, I think over time we're going to see adversaries starting to do much more nefarious things when they're able to take over cloud accounts, like, stealing data, encrypting entire S3 buckets and like, I think there's a category of adversarial attacks that we haven't really started to see yet using cloud. At the same time, I think that things like eBPF, by the way, also provide a kind of an untapped capability for cloud providers to interface and look across, the organization's fleet and be able to provide a level of insight and visibility that you have difficulty doing, when you're just looking at things on an agent by agent basis. So yeah, there will be no end of exciting security stuff to worry about for many years.
No. So long after we burn out and go do orchid farming, these issues will still be here.
Exactly right. All right. The last story for today also comes from Dark Reading, and the title here is Google cuts user account compromises in half with a simple change.
I think you mean this one simple change that will blow your mind.
Doctors don't want you to know about. So Google, to their credit, has started force turning on two-step verification for a lot of their end users. So they've turned it on for 150 million users, and their view is this cuts the risk of account takeover by half. Now, there's some kind of tortured discussion about what that actually means, because they interview Microsoft. I think the Microsoft interview was much more interesting, to be perfectly candid. Microsoft's spokesman or spokesperson says that there's from their experience, there's a 99.9% reduction in account compromises when multi-factor authentication is turned on. And this is, again, from their experience in Azure. But then they go on to say that in the context of Azure, only, I think it was 22% of their customers are using multi-factor authentication, which is kind of alarming.
Yeah. I tend to agree with them. However, we're seeing more and more evolution of multi-factor attack techniques that are being successful, primarily through social engineering, that we're seeing start to proliferate in reaction, I think, to this being pushed out by some of these providers. So, as always, it's a little bit of a cat and mouse game. Yeah,
I certainly agree with that. But I mean, right now, I think we're making it super, super easy to take over accounts. And you're absolutely right. Like, I think in the case of Google, they talk about, I think SMS is one of their options. And, we know that SMS is, at this point, a relatively easily defeated second factor. But
but
it is
work.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? It's like right now, the adversaries can at scale compromise accounts like en masse,
right?
By doing running password stuffing attacks using botnet armies and VPN providers and on and on and on. But if you have a crappy two-factor authentication, my experience at least is it removes that scale factor. Like you can still, for any given account, it's still relatively straightforward to compromise, but it becomes much more difficult to do. And, look, I'm quickly getting, as we talked about earlier in the show, I'm quickly getting to the point now where I think it's becoming really irresponsible for online service providers of really any kind not to just by default have two-factor. Maybe you still let people turn it off.
Yeah.
If they're feeling lucky, right? But by default, it's on. And
you're not wrong. I agree completely. And I think we know that SMS is attackable, but I feel like we get too hung up on the art of the possible instead of, okay, can we at least make some incremental improvements?
Yeah. We're letting the perfect become the enemy of the good enough, as the saying goes, right?
Yeah. And I if it really matters, don't use SMS, but at least turning on SMS makes it just that much harder for the bad guys. Yeah, they can get around it, but if you've got bars on your windows and your next door neighbor doesn't, and the guy's just looking to smash and grab, maybe he's going to go next door.
Yeah. Yep. And once we have this as a kind of a de facto stance, then we can look at better ways to do it. Google and Microsoft and others have the concept of, using devices. So like a pop-up, not necessarily a text, but, a pop-up on your phone or whatever to approve it. And by the way, like there's even ways around that the adversaries are starting to figure out. But again, it still takes away that scale factor.
Right.
And so, I think this is an area that we will see a lot of evolution in terms of the technology and attack techniques and whatnot. But like you said, like we can't just, act defeatist about it and say, like we can't make it perfect and therefore let's just not even try. I really think we need to be more aggressive here.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, it's great to talk to everybody again. I certainly appreciate your time. Hopefully this was useful to you.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Thanks as always for coming and joining us. We're trying to get back on track to record more often. So hopefully you guys are still out there with us.
Yeah, I think we're now up to more shows in 2022 than we did in the last 2 years. So that's pretty good.
Nice. Unlike everybody else, Jerry got busier during the plague times.
Oh my gosh, I sure did. I think other people did too, but it has been an exciting time in my life. I guess I'll say it that way.
Mm-hmm. May you live in interesting times.
That I do. All right, everybody. Thank you for everything. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lerg. It's Lerg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And you can find other back episodes on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. There's a link there to our Patreon, hat if you want to drop some money in to help support the show. And with that, we will talk again soon.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Yeah.